Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. North Korea continued with its cruise missile launch provocations this week, apparently seeking to perfect its newly developed weapon system. The South Korean government said South Korea will not falter in the face of the North's increasing provocations on the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. Central Bank decided to keep its benchmark lending rate steady at between 5.25 and 5.5% for the fourth straight time since it began to freeze the rate last September. The Fed did make clear that it's not ready to start cutting, with inflation still running above its target. The Gangwon 2024 Winter Youth Olympics over in Gangneung came to an end with a closing ceremony on Thursday. This year, a record 1,900 young athletes from 78 countries shared their winter spirit and dreams. North Korea continued with its military provocations here on the Korean Peninsula this week. The regime went ahead with cruise missile launches, this time into the sea off its west coast on Tuesday.
North Korea has fired another round of cruise missiles, this time off its western coast. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff detected the launch of several cruise missiles at around 7 a.m. Tuesday into the West Sea.
Our military has been closely coordinating with the U.S. to monitor additional signs of North Korea's provocations while strengthening our monitoring and vigilance.
This is the third cruise missile launch in less than a week. On the 24th, North Korea test-fired a newly developed strategic cruise missile named the Bulhwasal 3-31 for the very first time from a ground launcher toward the West Sea. And on the 28th, the same cruise missiles were launched from a submarine off its eastern coast. The type of cruise missile used for Tuesday's launch is unknown, but they're anticipated to have flown 1,500 to 2,000 kilometers. South Korean military officials and experts believe the test is aimed at enhancing the performance of the newly developed weapon system.
Firing cruise missiles toward the West Sea and the East Sea from land and sea is proof that improving the performance is important. North Korea is probably conducting final performance tests ahead of the actual deployment of this cruise missile.
Professor Yang Mu-jin at the University of North Korean Studies added that cruise missiles are cutting-edge weapons in terms of their accuracy and maneuverability and could potentially neutralize Seoul and Washington's defense strategy, adding that the government should continue to strengthen deterrence centered on the Seoul-Washington alliance, but should also refrain from neglecting dialogue. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Now, let's delve deeper into the North's latest course of provocations. We're joined by our defense correspondent, Choi Min-jung. Welcome back, Min-jung.
Thank you for having me.
So, Min-jung, the missiles the North fired on Tuesday were cruise missiles. Were they also the Bulhwasal 3-31?
Well, on the 24th and the 28th, North Korea is believed to have test-fired the new Bulhwasal 3-31. But the regime confirmed that the most recent launch on Tuesday was an existing strategic cruise missile, the Hwasal 2. The North state media reported Wednesday that the launch was aimed at checking its rapid counterattack posture and improving its strategic striking capability, and stressed that it did not pose a threat to the safety of neighboring countries. It appears that the North wanted to highlight that the weapon is fully developed and has been deployed to frontline units. North Korea has test-fired cruise missiles, the Hwasal 1 and Hwasal 2, a couple of times since 2021, and these missiles have a standard flight range of 1,500 to 2,000 kilometers, and they also fly low, making them harder to detect. Now, on Wednesday, North Korea released photos of the launch to show that the Hwasal 2 missile is capable of flying at low altitudes. Meanwhile, the Bulhwasal 3-31 can be seen as the upgraded version of the Hwasal 1 and 2 missiles. The name itself hints that it's more powerful than the missiles named Hwasal, which means arrow, with Bulhwasal translating to fire arrow. Experts also say that the Bulhwasal missile is likely better capable of delivering nuclear warheads.
So the regime has been test-firing all kinds of cruise missiles from Bulhwasal to Hwasal, and there were 3 cruise missile launches in less than a week. Min-jung, what's the motive behind all these threats and provocations?
Well, experts say the series of missile launches is widely seen as the North's attempt to diversify its weapon system. Let's take a listen.
North Korea wants it to appear that there are a wide range of threats that they could pose against South Korea and the United States, so that they're intimidating, so that they coerce us, they deter us from taking action against them.
The diversity of threats is also in line with key military goals unveiled by the regime 3 years ago. Under a 5-year plan laid out in 2021, the North said it aims to develop 5 types of new weapons, which include tactical nuclear weapons, a new ICBM, hypersonic gliding flight warheads, nuclear-powered submarines, as well as a reconnaissance satellite.
North Korea said the latest cruise missile test was conducted without considering the geopolitical situation, so it's likely that the regime's intention is to complete the 5 military tasks related to this new weapon on their own timeline.
So the North's ambitions to diversify its weapon system is also dialing up tensions here on the Korean Peninsula, which also makes South Korea to beef up its cooperation with the U.S. and Japan, right?
Right. South Korea's ambassador to the U.S., Cho Hyun-dong, said this week that Seoul will not be swayed by Pyongyang's continuous provocations and threats, and that it would strengthen its cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. He also reiterated President Yoon Suk-yeol's remarks that Seoul will never be perturbed or will never bow to those provocations. Seoul's envoy to Washington said that despite the heightened tensions, South Korea and its allies will continue to push for dialogue with North Korea. But even with the high-intensity threats by the North, Seoul and Washington agree that Pyongyang does not appear to be preparing for a full-scale war. However, they are not ruling out the possibility of the regime engaging in future provocations.
Right, we also have to talk about what the South Korea's commander-in-chief said to North Korea. What was the message exactly?
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol labeled the North Korean regime as the only irrational group in the world that has legalized the preemptive use of nuclear weapons. The remarks came as Yoon on Wednesday presided over the annual Integrated Defense meeting at the Blue House.
상식적인 정권이라면 핵을 포기하고 주민들이 살 길을 찾겠지만 북한 정권은 오로지 세습 전체주의 정권 유지를 위해 물불을 가리지 않고 있습니다.
Yoon also believes North Korea may attempt to interfere with the April general election in South Korea, as he noted that the regime has, quote, worked tirelessly to bring down South Korea's liberal democratic system for the past 70 years.
올해도 접경지 도발, 무인기 침투, 가짜 뉴스, 사이버 공격, 후방 교란 등 선거 개입을 위한 여러 도발이 예상되고 있습니다.
The president also held a meeting with key military commanders and called on soldiers to be mentally armed with a clear view of the country and its security. He stressed that the military should be prepared to crush North Korea's provocations through an overwhelming response.
Right, it's almost a given that the North will continue its provocations in all sorts of ways. So South Korea and its partner countries should certainly be on high alert ahead of the April general elections.
Right, and there's also the U.S. presidential election coming up in November as well.
Right. All right, Min Jung, thanks for the coverage today.
My pleasure.
The U.S. Federal Reserve this week decided to leave its interest rate steady as inflation slows. The Fed chair said more confidence is still needed on the inflation front before cutting the rates, meaning a possible rate cut in March is unlikely. Our economics correspondent Shin-Young has more.
After the U.S. Federal Reserve's first two-day meeting of this year, the FOMC on Wednesday announced a fourth consecutive rate freeze. With this latest decision, the benchmark interest rates in the U.S. remain in the 5.25% to 5.5% range. Since before the meeting, the market's focus has been on the timing of rate cuts from the Fed. There have been rising expectations of a March rate cut after the Fed last month hinted at 3 possible rate cuts in 2024. However, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell expressed doubts about a cut next month, saying it's less likely that the committee will reach a level of confidence about inflation, which would allow rates to be cut by the time of the March meeting.
It's not that the 6-month data isn't low enough. It is. It's just a question of can we take that with confidence that we're moving sustainably under 2%.
The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, which excludes food and energy, for last month rose 2.9% from the year before. This is the first time it has dropped to a 2% level since March 2021. The Fed chairman also said there is more concern about the risk of inflation staying above 2% than there is for major inflation spikes. One expert says it's because of the sacrifice needed to achieve the Fed's inflation target.
Chairman Powell has always said that their goal is 2% inflation, not inflation around 2%, but 2% on the dot. So there has been a lot of concern that getting from 3% to 2% will be very, very difficult, and it will involve a lot of sacrifice.
Meanwhile, the latest Fed rate freeze means the key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S. remains at 2 percentage points.
BOK will have to delay the rate cuts if they were planning to cut the rates during the first half of the year. But the good thing is that Chairman Powell is giving solid signals that he will lower the rates sometime this year unless inflation goes back up.
During Thursday's emergency macroeconomic meeting in South Korea, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok said that there is growing uncertainty about the timing of rate cuts in other countries, adding that the government will remain vigilant regarding the situation. 신하영, Arirang News.
Clouds over the global economy are beginning to part in 2024, according to the International Monetary Fund's latest report this week. The financial agency also signaled a brighter future for South Korea's economy amid a global landscape of recovery and resilience. Shin Se-byuk reports.
The International Monetary Fund on Tuesday upgraded its growth forecast for South Korea's economy to 2.3% this year. It is a slight increase of 0.1 percentage points from the previous forecast made in October last year. The fresh outlook is an expansion from a 1.4% increase last year. This projection aligns with the OECD's expectations and is higher than the anticipated growth set by the South Korean government of 2.2% and the Bank of Korea, which forecast 2.1%. The boost in South Korea's growth outlook came on the back of the robustness of its two major trading partners, the U.S. and China. The U.S. saw a growth rate of 2.5%, while China saw 5.2% growth in 2023. Globally, the IMF anticipates a 3.1% growth this year, up 0.2 points from its October forecast, largely bolstered by the strong performances of the U.S. and China. IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Grinches expressed a positive view of the global economy, highlighting its resilience and the potential for a smooth and stable growth path.
The global economy continues to display remarkable resilience, with inflation declining steadily and growth holding up. The chance of a soft landing has increased.
However, he warned that the foundation for growth was weak and that significant risks such as geopolitical unrest in the Middle East persisted, which could affect commodity prices and supply chains. By region, the U.S. is expected to post 2.1% growth this year. China is forecast to grow 4.6% in 2024, an upward adjustment of 0.4 percentage points. Japan's growth is anticipated to be limited to 0.9% as the boost from last year's weak yen and surge in consumer spending begins to fade. The Eurozone, which has been grappling with an economic downturn, is forecast to grow by 0.9%. In terms of the global outlook for next year, the IMF kept it steady at 3.2%, unchanged from its previous projection. Amid ongoing challenges, the IMF emphasized the need for timely adjustments in monetary policy, enhancing fiscal resilience, as well as pursuing structural reforms for long-term productivity. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
More daunting figures on South Korea's notoriously low birth rate came out this week. 1 out of 3 daycare centers and kindergartens that were open in 2022 will be gone in 2028. So in 4 years, only around 27,000 daycare centers will be open, whereas there were nearly 40,000 2 years ago. According to the Korea Institute of Childcare and Education's report released on Tuesday, the dramatic drop is all due to the poor birth rate here in the country. In fact, the number of children aged 17 or younger is expected to drop to below 7 million for the first time this year. The low birth rate is especially prominent in big cities, namely Busan, Seoul, Daegu, and Incheon, which means the situation isn't likely to be any better in smaller regions that are aging faster than ever. Experts also say there should be sufficient infrastructure like daycare centers and kindergartens in small cities and counties. And another possible solution is turning idle spaces like village halls into areas where daycare teachers can be dispatched to look after young children. Russian President Vladimir Putin officially registered himself for the March Russian presidential election. With his approval ratings already hovering around 80%, it's almost a given that the Russian leader will secure yet another 6-year term in office.
Russia's President Vladimir Putin will be running for office for the 5th time in the 2024 presidential election. On Monday, Russia's Election Commission announced his official registration as a candidate for the upcoming election in March.
Who is for, who is against, who abstained, approved unanimously.
Running as an independent, Putin required at least 300,000 signatures gathered by his campaign from at least 40 regions of Russia. Following an examination of 315,000 signatures collected from 89 regions, Russia's Central Election Commission officially approved Putin's candidacy for the election.
It's a great honor to receive and hand over the certificate of Russia's presidential candidacy to Vladimir Putin. I will do it very soon.
The 71-year-old incumbent president has an approval rating of about 80%. Putin's chance of securing another 6-year term in power is almost certain, especially with opposition figures and independent media outlets in danger of suppression. Opposition leader Alexei Navalny was handed a 19-year jail term in 2021 on charges of extremism, having led protests against the Kremlin. 3 other candidates from parties represented in parliament have also been approved by the commission, representing the Communist Party, the Nationalist Liberal Democratic Party, and the New People Party. Another potential candidate is liberal politician Boris Nadezhin, who expressed his support for an end to the conflict in Ukraine, but his candidacy is still under review. After first coming to power in 2000, Putin has won all 4 presidential elections in which he has been a candidate. He also served a 4-year term as prime minister from 2008 to 2012. In 2018, Putin separated himself from the United Russia Party, choosing to run independently, winning over 75% of the votes. Putin himself made a change to Russia's constitution in 2020, which allows him to run for 2 more 6-year terms and potentially remain in power until 2036. Lee Eun-hee, Arirang News.
A memorial built 20 years ago in Japan's Gunma Prefecture to remember Korean victims of wartime forced labor is now being removed, despite protests from civic groups and others there. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji tells us more.
Remembrance, reflection, and friendship. This is what's written on the front of a monument at a park in Gunma Prefecture, Japan, in 3 languages: English, Korean, and Japanese. On the back, it says Japan reflects deeply on the historical facts that caused significant damage to the Korean people, and that it will never repeat the same mistakes. The memorial was built 20 years ago by a civic group in Japan to remember the Korean victims who were forced to work as laborers during Japan's colonial rule of Korea from 1910 to 1945. It was mainly created to promote friendship between the 2 neighboring countries and the public's understanding of the history. But in 2014, Gunma Prefecture refused to renew the state permit, claiming there was a violation of rules after a civic activist made inappropriate political remarks in front of the monument. Then in 2022, Japan's top court ruled in favor of the Gunma officials. And starting this week, the local authorities have now closed the park and have begun to remove the memorial.
Gunma Prefecture gave permission for a monument to be built based on the condition that religious and political events and administrative matters would not be held there. However, I have heard permission has been revoked because the installer repeatedly violated these conditions.
The removal procedure was carried out despite strong protests from civic groups and others. Even the Japanese local news, Asahi Shimbun, said in an editorial on Tuesday that the local government should call off its decision to remove the memorial, calling on them to immediately stop the outrageous action. In response, the South Korean government simply said it hopes the issue can be taken care of without causing friction.
Our government hopes this issue can be resolved in a way that does not undermine the friendly relations between the 2 countries. To do this, necessary communication is taking place between South Korea and Japan.
The historical issue surrounding wartime forced labor has been a major factor that strained bilateral relations, as hundreds of thousands of Koreans were forced to work in Japanese companies under harsh conditions during colonial rule. 배은지, Arirang News.
And this week, the South Korean government again strongly protested Japan's repeated territorial claims to Dokdo Island. Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa said in a speech during a session of the Diet on Tuesday that the island was the territory of Japan historically, geographically, and under international law. This is the 11th year in a row that a Japanese foreign minister has made such claims during an annual speech on the country's foreign policy objectives. In response, the South Korean Foreign Ministry spokesperson said in a statement that Tokyo should immediately withdraw such claims. The world's best young athletes wrapped up their 14-day Winter Games over in South Korea's Gangneung on Thursday. Our Song Yujin was at the grand closing ceremony where the young dreamers celebrated the last bit of winter spirit.
Goodbye, Gangwon 2024. The Gangwon 2024 Winter Youth Olympic Games came to a close on Thursday night. Though heavy snow warnings were issued in most parts of Gangwon province, the weather did little to dampen the festivities.
This is our 6th day here. We watched figure skating and took a look around the festival booths like K-food tryouts and photo booths. I hope Korea hosts more international sports events like this in the future.
I hope the athletes enjoy this beautiful snowy day as they've just finished competing.
The closing ceremony started with a pre-show at the plaza outside the Gangneung Hockey Center. Unlike the opening ceremony, the event was open to everyone, so no need to buy a ticket. The 35-minute official ceremony began at 8 p.m. It featured a screening of highlights from the Games, the parade of the flags, and the extinguishing of the first-ever digital Olympic cauldron. Around 1,700 people attended the event, including International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach, Gangwon 2024 Organizing Committee Chairman Choi Jong-gu, athletes, volunteers, and spectators. Team Korea also had its grand finale on Thursday, ending its Olympic run the same way it started, with gold. Gold medals were added in the figure skating team event and men's snowboard halfpipe. With this, Korea has won a total of 7 gold, 6 silver, and 4 bronze. So throughout the Games, we witnessed remarkable performances from 1,800 athletes representing 70 national Olympic committees across 15 disciplines and 7 sports. Now, with the closing ceremony, Gangwon 2024 has ended its 14-day journey. Song Yujin, Arirang News, Gangneung.
Seoul Fashion Week is back to show off its 2024 fall and winter collection. Now, Seoul is the first city to hold a fashion week this season ahead of New York, looking to attract attention from foreign markets with more money to spend. Our Choi Soo-hyung shows us what to look out for.
Seoul Fashion Week is known for its innovative and eclectic style, often blending traditional elements and modern trends. 2024 Seoul Fashion Week's fall and winter season embarked on its 5-day run on Thursday. This season, some Korean fashion designers famous among young people gather at Dongdaemun Design Plaza and Seongsu S Factory, the country's fashion hub. Like the previous seasons, the venue is being held earlier than usual to grab the attention of the world's fashion media.
For this year's autumn and winter collection, Seoul Fashion Week takes place 6 weeks earlier than the Big Four, New York, Paris, Milan and London.
A total of 21 runway shows are scheduled, 15 at DDP and 6 at S Factory. The week kicked off with designer Park So-young's brand July Column, which has become a popular label in Korea.
July Column is very much a new generation, and Park So-young is the only designer in Korea with such craftsmanship. I was impressed with the diverse mix and match of knit, layer patterns, and meticulous detailing. I think the designer tries to balance between classic with fresh and international while also embracing a distinct Korean aesthetic.
During the show, the world-renowned South Korean soprano singer Park Hae-sang took the runway to perform her newly released song.
Nowadays, the world really can't ignore K-beauty and fashion. I think we have the power to lead, and the stage was so unique due to a collaboration with the opera singer. It was touching and truly impressive.
In particular, this season aims to increase the participation of young generation brands with high potential for global growth. And so, the Seoul metropolitan government, the host of this event, has invited 68 domestic brands to take part. Moreover, celebrating its 23rd year, various events allow visitors to have a memorable experience. A massive 12-meter-long graffiti wall welcomes attendees in front of TDP Square.
I think Korean people in general, they're very well coded. Like every time I see them, their pants always go with their shirts, their shoes always go with everything. Also, the fashion differs from the place that you're in. Like if you go to Hongdae, you'll see like more street fashion, and Shinsa is like more like professional look.
The event will run until February 5th, showcasing diverse talent and contributing significantly to the global fashion scene. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this week. We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.